All right, guys, our next guest does an incredible job of covering and keeping the MMA community up to date on the latest in Russian and Eastern European MMA. We love having him on and listening to his insight and amazing stories about his own experiences. He's an editor for BloodyElbow.com and a columnist for Sports on Earth. Karim Zidan, welcome back to Submission Radio. It's been ages, and we've missed you, man.
Well, you know what? It has been too long, and I keep thinking all the time, when am I going to be back on Submission Radio again? And, it's great to be back on, and it's always good to talk to you guys. So, yeah, let's see what you guys want to start with here. There's a lot of crazy things to talk about that's been happening lately in just the Russian MMA landscape.
Yeah, this is why we've brought you on, man. You are officially the expert. So there's a lot to talk about. Let's start talking about one of the major things we want to get your insight on. A few weeks ago, Chechenya's strongman leader Ramzan Kadyrov held an MMA event which featured 3 of his sons fighting on the card. Their ages range between 8 and 11 years old. The fact that his children this young were fighting sparked a huge amount of controversy and criticism pretty much all around the world, not just in Russia, including from the legendary Fedor Emelianenko. Before we get into the whole aftermath with Fedor, what did you make of the situation of the kids fighting at this event, Karim?
Well, I first got light of this basically the day before the event happened, when Akhmad MMA, basically Kadyrov's promotion, started promoting the fights on social media, and then suddenly there was a video that had gone up of the weigh-ins. And during the weigh-ins, they specifically had a video of his middle child, Adam, who is about 9 years old. And in that video, Adam goes up onto the gold scale. Yes, Chechnya does have a gold scale that these fighters weigh on.
Is it made out of gold, or is it just gold in color?
Oh, it is made out of gold, like solid gold.
Then everybody would be overweight, right? Everybody would weigh like 300 kilos.
I have no idea. Well, I'm not quite sure if it's the top part of it that's gold. However it works. The point is that's one of the things they promoted when they first got, is they talked about, look at us, we're so special, we've got this gold scale. But anyway, that's against the point here. So he stands there and he's showing off, and he's putting on all the theatrics that a fighter would ahead of like trying to promote sort of a UFC main event or something. And he's really into this little 8-year-old, 9-year-old kid. And I'm thinking, oh my God, what did they have to do to get him to be this aggressive, this young, and this early, basically? Like, how did they convince him into this? And the whole scene just seemed so bizarre to me that I was like, well, they can't really pull this off. This must be an exhibition fight. So I decided, all I did was post a video and made light of the fact that, this fight might possibly happen. But I didn't specify that it was going to be an actual MMA fight, because even I wasn't convinced that Chechenya's strongman leader, for all his bizarre megalomaniac antics, I wasn't convinced he'd put his own children in actual MMA fights. And boy, was I wrong. So the following day on the Akhmad card, in 3 featured bouts of the evening, so all on the main card, some of those fights actually took place after Magomed Biblatov, World Series of Fighting's flyweight champion's own title fight on the Akhmad card. So that fight happened. After that, you've got a co-main event with Adam Kadyrov against a poor 9-year-old Ossetin kid. And honestly, that kid looked terrified, absolutely terrified to be there. And just got, there was no protective gear whatsoever on them. They wore gloves the size of a regular fighter's gloves in MMA. There was no headgear. There was no sort of protective padding whatsoever on them. And it was 3 5-minute rounds. It was craziness. I couldn't understand what I was watching. It did not look like an exhibition fight. They certainly looked like they were swinging and kicking. And what was really interesting was that Kadyrov's children looked well-trained. For children, they looked very well-trained. There are adults who throw worse punches than those kids did. And that is a terrifying thing to think about. So the whole scene was bizarre, and it did not take long for the Russian media community, which is, interestingly enough, they keep quiet about a great many things. And articles went up very, very quickly. And we're talking mainstream Russian media, so not necessarily sports sites, but really important state-owned websites like TASS.ru, Alenta.ru, all these specifically politics-based websites started publishing these articles about how Kadyrov, Chechenya's strongman dictator leader, his hosting children fights for entertainment purposes, basically. And all these articles had a negative tone, which I found really interesting. It was something you don't really expect generally when it comes to Kadyrov. Kadyrov, you get articles about him, and it's usually, oh, look at the ridiculous thing he's doing. But this sort of condemnation was really rare. And it was only shortly thereafter, of course, that Fedor Emelianenko himself spoke out. And when he spoke out is when things really started to like, that's what really got the ball rolling, basically. It was his comments that got the attention of the Kremlin. So the actual Russian government got involved as soon as Fedor put those comments out, because he spoke on behalf of the Russian MMA Union, which is certified by the Russian government themselves, operates within the boundaries of the government, etc. So Fedor, being the president of that association, once he puts out such a powerful statement condemning the fight, which, mind you, has since been deleted, but we'll get into that later, it's definitely shook the community. The Chechens themselves were so shocked and rattled by the fact that Fedor himself would actually come out against the event that they immediately started targeting him with all sorts of harassment and intimidation and humiliation tactics that I just thought were disgusting. They'd specifically post a lot of pictures of him after the Fabio Maldonado fight. So a lot of those pictures with his swollen face and swollen head went up. People talking about why, if you can't even protect yourself, why are you trying to speak out in the protection of everyone else? And all sorts of really, really horrible comments. Why don't you go look after your rapist brother? Stuff like that. So there was a lot of that. And this wasn't coming from random fans, because if we're talking about trolls or just hate in general coming from fans, well, I mean, everybody gets that to a certain extent, especially after controversial statements. But what Fedor got was from State Duma members, so parliamentarians, basically. He got these sort of comments from fighters, notable fighters. So Magomed Biblatov himself, the World Series of Fighting flyweight champion, was one of the people who put out all the statements. UFC fighter Abdikarim Edilov was another one who put out a lot of statements. And mind you, Edilov himself was the person who trained Kadyrov's children. So a UFC fighter signed and contracted to fight in the UFC, even though he's suspended right now for meldonium, is the same person who trained these children to compete in illegal fights. So that's something that should be noted as well, that the UFC is employing some people who've committed some really heinous acts, as far as I'm concerned. And more people who came out and condemned Fedor were people like Khabib Nurmagomedov, a person who's supposedly supposed to be the number one contender in the lightweight division, and former heavyweight champion Fabricio Verdum. So the list goes on for the people who have associated with Kadyrov and chose to side with him over Fedor, even though the Russian MMA union's rules specifically state that no child below the age of 12 can ever compete in mixed martial arts, and between the age of 12 and 18, they must wear both headgear and a lot of protective gear. The round system is structured differently. It has to be certified and regulated by the union, which it wasn't done at all in Kadyrov's case. So there was really no reason to defend the event. Yet a lot of people immediately lashed out against Fedor, and that obviously led to a whole other series of events afterwards. But it was very disappointing to see immediately the schism this created in the Russian MMA community, because you could immediately see it devolving to an argument between the North Caucasus, being Dagestan, Chechnya, and Muslim Russians, against the Orthodox Slavic Russians that backed Fedor. And you could see it from the fighters who backed Fedor versus the people who backed Kadyrov. So it seemed like this sort of incident was going to be the dividing line in Russian MMA, which would have taken the sport back many years in Russia, especially since it got legalized in 2012. It would have taken the sport back many, many years, just because of Kadyrov's antics and because someone as big and as polarizing as Fedor came out against him, basically. So the whole situation really reached a boiling point. And then a few days later, after a lot of people threatened Fedor on Instagram, Kadyrov decides to come out and say, you know what? I think Fedor has learned his lesson, and he probably wants to apologize anyway. So I want all you Chechens, all my fighters, all my friends and followers to take down these messages. This is not the Chechen way. So he wanted to, of course, come out as the magnanimous leader who's not affected by other people's mistakes. So all those messages have since been deleted. I've published articles that noted these Instagram posts and embedded them, and they're no longer available.
Mm-hmm.
So those posts that I've published there no longer have those Instagram embeds because they've all been deleted by Kadyrov's request. And ever since then, that's the point where things got really interesting, of course. Fedor's daughter was reportedly assaulted a couple of days later in Moscow. And immediately, it's very difficult to hear that happen after Fedor has been threatened by the henchman for the Chechen strongman who's known to make people disappear, especially people he doesn't like, and known for the extreme levels of intimidation and the extent of his intimidation that he's willing to go to, murder people and the human rights abuses that he's willing to cause. It's very easy for people to get the impression that Fedor spoke out and then Kadyrov wanted to teach him a lesson, so he attacked Fedor's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And as it stands right now, I mean, Casper, Dennis, I'm on the phone with you guys here right now, and I can tell you honestly, I do not know what happened there. I can tell you the way I believe it's laid out, and there's multiple options. And I've spoken to many people, and many people are convinced with multiple avenues that this could have gone. Many people honestly do not believe Kadyrov would have stooped so low as to actually attack Fedor's daughter. They see it as an unnecessary step and something that would have caused way too much grief for too little a reward. He believes that that's not the way that he would have intimidated Fedor, and that his game had already been played out and there was no use taking this any further. Now, what I've heard a lot more of is one of two other options, which is indirectly one of Kadyrov's crazed supporters wanted to do good for his leader and went on his own sort of mission to find Fedor's daughter and assault her. And when we're talking about the assault of Fedor's daughter, I should mention, for those who don't know the story, Fedor's daughter was his middle daughter, 16 years old, was on her way to school in Moscow when an unidentified assailant stepped out of nowhere and basically kicked her in the chest, and she had to be hospitalized with bruising and all sorts of issues afterwards. She was hospitalized for a couple of days. So up until now, they don't know who the assailant is. And people immediately assumed that it was Kadyrov, or Kadyrov had sent someone out. Now that seems like too small for Kadyrov, someone who has been also alleged to have been involved in the murder of Putin's biggest political rival, Boris Nemtsov. For him to go from that political sort of assassination attempt, again, alleged, there is no proof that it's Ramzan Kadyrov who's behind it, but to go from that to kicking the daughter of a famous fighter seems like a step down for the dictator. And this is not to come to his defense at all, but to say that there are other avenues that seem to make more sense. And one of them is that one of his crazed supporters actually went on his own mission to do so, to strike fear into Fedor. The other alternative is that someone else would looking to continue the schism created in Russian MMA and truly segment Muslim fighters from Orthodox fighters by extending this problem. But that's the same argument that Kadyrov went back to when he made a statement saying we would never, and no Chechen would ever attack Fedor's daughter. He immediately said that somebody is trying to provoke the situation. Now that seems like an easy ploy, an easy excuse, and an easy way out, but all it did was convolute the situation a lot more. Fedor's daughter has already given a statement to the police saying that the assailant looked to be of Slavic origin. Now, what that statement's supposed to mean is that the person does not look like your average fighter from the North Caucasus. He doesn't look like a Khabib Nurmagomedov, basically. So that Slavic feature is what you think of the old traditional Russian feature. But when you really think about it, and as someone personally who knows a lot of Chechens, and I've met a lot of them, and I've seen a lot of them in Russia, some of them look as European as it gets. We're talking red hair, blonde hair, blue eyes. How are you really supposed to differentiate on a camera, a pixelated camera on a screen, and a half-identified person? How are you really going to know truly where they're from? So the whole situation is really bizarre, and it never played out fully, but as it seems right now, it has fizzled down. Fedor hasn't made any statements. Apparently, he's back in training for a potential fight. But as it stands right now, Kadyrov's already moved on to a whole different political game. And he happens to have a reality TV show now, so it's a whole bizarre situation. Yep.
Maybe the attacker will be featured on the reality show. Makes a cameo. Yeah. Hey, it's Jim. There you go.
The big reveal. He's like the Kardashians of Russia.
He really is. Only people lose their lives trying to talk about him. You don't see people reporting on the Kardashians and the Kardashians putting out hits on them, but it's a whole different ball game with Kadyrov, sadly.
Yeah, there's a new season coming out on E soon, so who knows what that season's going to bring, but not yet. Let's quickly talk about this. While you're talking about this whole Fedor thing, I just have a couple of questions. I mean, so much to digest, and thank you so much, Karim, for all that. I mean, so much going on over there. When people think of Fedor, they think of a man who's powerful in politics over in Russia, respected man. Why do you think he deleted the comment from social media? Do you actually think there was fear on his end of potential repercussions as to what happened to his daughter, or do you think politically someone sort of made him take it down because it was further causing a rift between Orthodox and Muslim Russians?
Well, I think that's a very good question, to be honest, because I've had a lot of people send me odd tweets where I think they really are misguided in terms of what they understand about Fedor and his relationship with Vladimir Putin. And I tried, when I put up my feature about it a few weeks ago, to really explain the difference between Putin's alliance with Kadyrov versus his with Fedor. Now, people sent me messages saying, well, Fedor is best friends with Putin, or he's really good friends with Putin. Now, I need to say this right now. None of that is true. Absolutely none of that is true. They do not maintain a real friendship. That does not happen. It's just not the way it operates. Fedor was elevated into the political elite because of his status as an athlete. I have done many articles discussing the importance of sports diplomacy in a place like the Russian Federation. And an icon like Fedor Emelianenko, particularly a Slavic, believing Orthodox Russian combat sports fighter, it was basically the perfect package for Putin. So Putin elevated him into the political elite by giving him higher status, better paying jobs, and also a whole life outside of fighting in exchange for political favors, being what? Fedor, in Putin's last election, campaigned for him. And that was extremely effective, because this was around the time where Putin's popularity was dipping because of issues like the annexation of Crimea and a multitude of other issues, including a recession that was ongoing. So there were various reasons why not to like Putin, and using the influence of a fighter like Fedor was exceptionally important. And he did this with a variety of other people. Like, you think of famous Russian wrestlers like Alexander Karl, and all these different people ended up in the State Duma and Parliament. Fedor is sort of on that same trajectory where if he wants to enter politics, he can most certainly enter politics. Now, to answer your question about whether he was intimidated or not, I think the truth is he was probably told, the best thing you can do right now, your message has been received, all the outlets have already reported it, there is no point keeping your message up to continue this feud. I believe he also realized his position amongst in the hierarchy next to Putin. We're talking about a fighter at the end of the day up against a strongman leader in Chechnya who has leverage over the Kremlin because of how volatile Chechnya is as a republic. Putin needs Kadyrov more than he needs Fedor. And Fedor realized that very quickly during this situation. Yes, the Kremlin did speak out and did condemn the child MMA fights, but when it came down to actually reviewing it and sending out punishment, all they did was send Akhmat MMA, Kadyrov's promotion, a sternly worded letter. That was it. That was the extent of it. No mention of the assault. No one seems to be looking into it much anymore. It's all been hush-hush. So honestly, it seems like the Kremlin is trying to do damage control to silence the situation right now, just to end it. Because they know Fedor is the sort of person that it's easy for, if something happens to him, there's a lot of people who back him immediately because he's so beloved amongst your average Russian because of the morals he stands by, not just his professional career, because he's so orthodox, because he's so modest. A huge segment of the Russian people really admire that about him. So if something happens to him or issues happen to him, this is bad news for the Kremlin because it's bad publicity. in the first place, because people do know that this is one of Putin's favorite athletes. Now, if you want to phrase it that way, a favorite athlete, that makes a lot more sense to me than framing it like friends. If anyone understands Putin in politics and the way he handles things, I don't think friendship factors in much at all when it comes to his idea of where an athlete stands. Now, it's very different if you're one of Putin's friends and one of his judo teammates from back in the day. A couple of those people now actually run the Judo Federation in Russia and are both oligarchs. So they're billionaires based on the fact that they can get state contracts to do all sorts of infrastructure work in Russia, and they get them from who? Putin. Now, that's very different because those are people that Putin can have as truly be loyal to him, and he can reap long-term benefits from. What can he truly reap from Fedor, apart from those small political favors like helping him in re-election campaigns, etc.? And he won't use him twice. So he's done his part now, and he's elevated Fedor. Fedor knows now that he has to maintain his position amongst that elite. How does he do so? Well, the truth is, fighting Kadyrov is definitely not one way to do it.
That is a great way of looking at it, Karim, and I'm glad you sort of explained that. Dennis and myself, a lot of time we sort of suspect that our friendship with Putin may just be him using us for our political insight into the Australian world. But in all seriousness, you mentioned the letter that the Kremlin sent out. And obviously them ruling against child fights and looking to prevent them from happening in the future. Interesting thing is Fedor wasn't actually at that meeting, even though members of the Russian MMA Union were present. Do you think this is the end of this chapter? And, would Kadyrov actually follow the Kremlin's orders and not do any more child fights? Or do you think he would just ignore it and keep doing it?
I truly believe that this whole incident was bad publicity for everyone involved. The truth is, no one came out of this looking perfect. No one at all. Fedor made new enemies. Kadyrov embarrassed his republic because at the end of the day, he did not get the approval of the Kremlin, and they ruled against him. So headlines in Russia were Kremlin rules against Kadyrov. That does not look good on someone who's already losing slight leverage because Putin is reworking the deal between Moscow and Chechen. Now, this is a long political discussion that I really don't think we'll have time to get into. But the truth is, where Kadyrov stood with Putin in 2008 is very different to where he stands with him in 2016. And incidents like this really are just completely unnecessary when there is so much at stake in terms of policy, actual governing policy in the country, whether or not to stand by his guns over a child MMA fight and make a big deal out of this. I truly think in terms of where Kadyrov is, this is the end of the line in that story, and he will obey in terms of having the Chechen government and the Chechen sports ministry follow the guidelines and not have kids compete before the age of 12 and with headgear on. But I would not be surprised to see him continue the strategy of using child fights, particularly his own children, because what he did with it, people didn't seem to understand why I was so upset with the concept. It's not just because they're child fights. Yes, I understand that kids are doing martial arts in taekwondo, karate, and they fight in football and in all sorts of other sports where there's also contact from a very young age, from 7 and earlier. I understand all that. But there's protective gear and there's regulations, and these are not hosted by a dictator who's using them for entertainment and propaganda purposes. What we witnessed that night was dynastic propaganda where Kadyrov showcased his own children and said, look at my bloodline. These are fit rulers. This is why the Kadyrov line is ruling Chechnya right now. That's what we witnessed. People in general in the United States might not have seen that, but in Chechnya, that's what they understood in that. And that's the message Kadyrov was trying to send. It's part of his militarization of the Chechen youth. He is creating his own personal army. He already has 30,000 Kadyrovsky as part of his personal army, legitimately outside of the control of the Kremlin. They operate and they follow the orders of only Ramzan Kadyrov. And if that is not a terrifying thought, I really don't know what is. It's terrible. It's terrible in all ways involved. Combat sports, for so long, we've seen corruption involved in it between gangsters trying to work their way in, money laundering issues, dictators being involved to distract from human rights abuses, as we're still seeing to this day in places like Bahrain. where they have MMA events and the Formula One race, and at the same time are still locking people up for media censorship and all sorts of different reasons, just because journalists are being journalists and actually reporting the news, and just because others are trying to step up and say, you know what, we don't like what is going on. They will use athletes. There are athletes right now in Bahrain, jiu-jitsu fighters, and all sorts of different other MMA fighters that are in jail right now because they were on the wrong side at the wrong time. And we're going to continue to see this in combat sports as long as fans are willing to watch it just because it is still MMA. If it's still MMA and you're just looking to watch a fight for a fight, at least think about who you're supporting and who is dying because of what you are ignorantly allowing onto your TV screen.
It's a crazy story, and definitely something that everybody needs to focus on. And it's great that you're bringing light to this, Karim. Finally, while we're talking about Kadyrov, it seemed like an alleged assassination attempt on his life. As we finish up on this topic, do you know exactly what happened here, or can you tell us anything about this?
All I know is actually this incident apparently occurred a few months ago, and it was on it's very difficult to know the actual details because Chechnya is controlling the information that's coming out. And I don't want to speak out of turn with political things that I truly don't understand very well, but from the conversations I had, Kadyrov is trying to deny, as a matter of fact, that there was an attempt on his life several months ago when several militants were captured on the way into Grozny, carrying basically weaponry and aiming to come to the palace after him. Whether this was a serious attempt or not, or whether this was the case, or what he was trying to prove through leaking this information at this certain point, it's very difficult to tell because, again, he plays so many, not necessarily mind games, but everything is part of the chess game overall. All the leaked information, anything you've seen coming out of Chechnya is trying to either benefit him or attack someone from his neighboring republic or send a message to the Kremlin. So that's what we're getting through this. At the end of the day, if we have to be honest, there's probably been many attempts on Kadyrov's life over the years. Many attempts, as any leader would probably face. And in such a region that's volatile like Chechnya, I mean, just the clan wars that took place during the First and Chechen War, for us to even get to the Kadyrov line running Chechnya, there was a lot of death that came up towards that stage. A lot of death. So there's a lot of people out there probably who still don't like Kadyrov. A lot of people who are all over the world, which is why you hear of Chechens dying in places like Dubai, in assassinations, etc., because he has a lot of enemies around the world, and he's still going after them just to secure his spot. As far as Moscow is concerned, I think they want Kadyrov around in Chechnya for a while, which is why I'm not surprised he's grooming his children the way he is. Again, it's all involved. MMA is not just escapism. It is really and legitimately being used as a tool, as a political tool to influence and shape policy and government.
Wow. Before we let you go, Karim, obviously we've only got a few minutes left before we have to let you go, but we just wanted to sort of get an update. What can you tell us about Fedor Emelianenko's latest fight rumors? And let me add to that, he did say in a recent interview that he's, in negotiations with promotions such as Ryzen, EFN, and the UFC. Do you know if there are actually even any UFC negotiations taking place? And with the new owners and drastic staff cuts, is it even remotely likely that Fedor would somehow end up in the UFC, or is this just another tease as per usual?
I'll try and take it in the order that you asked those questions. So as far as the updates, yes, he is back in training. He's in Stary Oskol, but his coach was actually hospitalized recently, and I'm not sure he's gotten back in the gym yet. So there was a bit of a shake-up in the gym, and especially over the past few weeks with all the stuff that was going on with his daughter, etc. He was moving back and forth, and I know he had duties as the president of the Russian MMA Union over the past few weeks, delivering all sorts of awards and attending certain events in St. Petersburg last week. So I'm pretty sure he only just resumed training this week. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. In terms of potential fights, from what I heard, the Shane Carwin fight is not on the table. I'm not sure if that's already become news or not. I haven't checked, to be honest. But as far as I've been told, the Shane Carwin fight was offered to Fedor. He considered it an interesting fight, but in the end believed he wasn't going to be trained enough or ready enough to take it. And I'm not sure why his actual reason for rejecting the fight was, but that's what I heard from my source, and that Fedor ultimately put the contract aside and said that this is not the fight for him. I've also heard that he's not doing his negotiations aren't going very well with Ryzen in particular. I haven't heard anything about Bellator, but I know that Ryzen in particular is not interested in paying his fee again, and they're still upset about him deciding to work with multiple promotions instead of maintain sort of that special bond that could have been sparked with Ryzen, and that he returned to Russia afterwards, which Saki Kabara apparently did not expect him to do. So that sort of affected their negotiations from then onwards. And in terms of the UFC, as far as I know, there is absolutely nothing to update there. No negotiations whatsoever. I do not believe he has started negotiations with the new owners. And this all could be very hush-hush at the same time, because his press team and all sorts of other people around him, the Fedor team themselves, have been silent since the Kadyrov incident. Like, even the reports that came out that he was in training came out because the reporter who said so, actually, Alexei Safarov, is actually a good friend of mine from Russia, and he was on the same flight, or in the same sort of, like, they were transiting around the same time. He saw Fedor there, and that's how they sort of had that conversation, and he got the update from Fedor. But in general, Fedor's team has been really, really silent these days, so it's very difficult to tell exactly what they're doing.
Wow, so much stuff going on, Karim. Thank you so much for joining us today. Guys, make sure to follow Karim on Twitter @Zidan Sports. He does great coverage, obviously, of MMA. You have to make sure to keep on top of these stories. Just fantastic work. And also, great coverage of the tennis. And Karim, I don't know if you'll be down here for the Australian Open, but Andy Murray looks to be the best man in the world right now. A quick prediction. Do you think Djokovic takes the Australian Open, or is Murray going to reign next year?
Here's the thing. I think Andy Murray has gone to like 5 Australian Open finals, 5 of them, and he hasn't won the title. It's become sort of that he has to do it before he retires. So with complete bias, you can't ask me a prediction question involving Andy Murray and not expect it to be biased. Like, honestly, I mean, I'm a big Andy Murray fan, and I'm sure you know this, but I'm convinced that he has it in him, especially with the way he's playing versus the way Djokovic is playing right now. He has it in him not only to beat Djokovic. We've seen him beat Djokovic before, but to beat him at the Australian Open and win that like elusive title. I'm certain he can do it. Whether 2017 will be the year, I certainly hope so. And if that's the case, I hope I'm there with you guys enjoying it.
That's right. We'll have to give you a bit of barbecue and a couple of beers, guys. Karim Zidan, make sure to follow him. He is a treasure in the MMA community. I mean, just the work that you do just while you're on the program, we just want to commend you. It's a fantastic job, and we can't wait to see what happens next, guys. Make sure to follow him, and no doubt about it, we'll have him back on the show soon with more updates. Karim, thank you so much for your time. Guys, we'll be right back. More Submission Radio right after this.